and $141 billion over 5 years for housing, defense, and productivity. A high-risk, long-game bid for independence.
Breaking tonight, Ottawa shocks markets. $78.3 billion in new deficits to buy strategic autonomy.
Breaking tonight, Canada's fiscal strategy just shifted dramatically. Ottawa didn't retreat, they doubled down. Tensions are rising across North America tonight. Canada announced a generational budget that shocked markets, but instead of conservative caution, Minister Champagne accelerated investment timelines that nobody saw coming. Everyone believed Canada would play it safe in uncertain times. Financial analysts expected deficit reduction and austerity measures. Markets assumed Ottawa would bow to fiscal pressure and cut spending dramatically. They were all utterly incorrect. Ottawa, April 16th, 2025. Finance Minister Champagne stood in the House of Commons and delivered a message that sent shockwaves through Parliament. If economic sovereignty is threatened, Canada will not hesitate. We will invest in our future starting immediately with $78 billion in deficit spending. Translation, Ottawa just told Washington that Canadian autonomy is non-negotiable. And what happened next reveals exactly why Canada's gamble is reshaping North American power dynamics while traditional relationships collapse. But here's what you need to understand in the first 30 seconds. This isn't just another budget announcement. This is Canada betting its entire economic future on a single hypothesis. That bold investment today will deliver independence tomorrow. And the stakes? They couldn't be higher. Because while America descends into political chaos and Europe struggles with stagnation, Canada just made a move that financial strategists will study for decades. They looked at a world in crisis and decided the riskiest move wasn't spending big, it was staying small. Dear viewers, welcome back. It's 7 a.m. somewhere, and we're about to discuss the most audacious fiscal gamble of the decade. If you're interested in how nations make generational decisions under pressure, you'll want to hit subscribe right now. This channel is for people who want depth, not noise. And what we're witnessing in Canada demands your complete attention. Before we go further, let me say something. Right now, governments are placing trillion-dollar bets while wrapping everything in political language designed to confuse rather than clarify. In moments like these, the most valuable thing you can have isn't more information, it's the ability to cut through what you're being told and see what's actually happening. The ability to see through the spin, spot the patterns, and think independently. That's not automatic, it's a skill. And it's never been more valuable than right now. So let's get into what Canada actually did here and why you should care, even if you've never set foot in Ottawa. First, understand the headline number. 78.3 billion Canadian dollars in a deficit spending, not during a pandemic, not during a recession, not during a crisis. This is proactive, deliberate, strategic investment in a moment when most countries are paralyzed by indecision. And here's what makes this brilliant. Canada isn't just spending money, they're buying autonomy. Think about the geopolitical landscape right now. America is unreliable. Trade relationships are fragmenting. Supply chains are weaponized. Defense commitments are uncertain. In this environment, dependency equals vulnerability. And Canada just decided they're done being vulnerable. The budget commits $141 billion over 5 years to infrastructure, housing, defense, and productivity. But listen carefully to what that actually means. Infrastructure means Canada doesn't need foreign construction partnerships. Housing means domestic economic stability without external shocks. Defense means strategic independence from unpredictable allies. Productivity means competitive advantage that compounds annually. This is statecraft disguised as a spending plan. And the scale matters enormously. This isn't marginal adjustment, it's transformation. Canada is explicitly saying, we're redesigning our structural position in the global economy, while we still have the window to do it. Because windows close. Ask Europe about their missed opportunities in 2015. Ask Japan about their lost decades. Timing in economics isn't everything, it's the only thing. Here's another element most analysts are missing. The fiscal anchors. Yes, Canada announced massive deficits, but they simultaneously committed to balancing day-to-day operating spending by 2028 and maintaining a declining deficit to GDP ratio. That's not recklessness, that's calculated risk with guardrails. Markets don't panic about spending. They panic about chaos, and Canada just demonstrated they understand the difference. There's also something profound happening with narrative coherence. Look, most budgets you'll ever read feel like a grocery list. A bit of this, some of that, whatever got negotiated in backroom deals. This one doesn't read that way. Everything in here points in the same direction. Canada knows the old partnerships aren't as reliable as they used to be, so they're building the capacity to stand alone if they have to. Infrastructure, housing, defense, clean energy, productivity tools. It all serves the same purpose. And can we acknowledge the political courage here? Because in an era where every democratic leader is terrified of criticism, where delay and deflection are default settings, Canada's government just said, we believe this is right and we're doing it anyway. The benefits won't arrive next quarter. The political cost is immediate. The criticism will be deafening. They did it anyway. That's leadership. Agree or disagree with the choices, but you cannot deny the seriousness of intent. Now let's discuss where this becomes risky, because every gamble has a downside, and Canada's is significant. First, the obvious problem, $78 billion in deficit spending creates vulnerability. If global markets turn, if interest rates spike unexpectedly, if commodity prices collapse, Canada's debt servicing costs could spiral rapidly. They're betting that borrowing conditions remain favorable long enough for investments to generate returns. That's not guaranteed. Second, the savings assumptions are soft. The government claims they'll find $60 billion in efficiencies over 5 years through bureaucratic streamlining and tax compliance improvements. But everyone makes those claims. Bureaucracies resist cuts. Tax evasion is harder to catch than promised. These aren't locked-in offsets. They're optimistic projections. And if those savings don't materialize, the deficit picture gets significantly worse. Third, there's an inflation risk nobody's discussing loudly enough. Pouring tens of billions into construction and housing in a tight labor market could overheat specific sectors. Canada's trying to fight affordability concerns, while simultaneously injecting massive demand into strained supply chains. That's threading a needle in a hurricane. Fourth, and this is critical, productivity improvements are slow. Yes, infrastructure helps long-term growth. Yes, R&D investments matter. But Canada's core productivity challenge isn't just capital, it's regulatory complexity, innovation, ecosystems, and talent utilization. This budget addresses some symptoms, but not all root causes. You can't simply spend your way to productivity, you have to reform your way there. And finally, the political fragility. This is a minority government. This budget is essentially a confidence vote. If opposition parties decide to bring down the government, Canadians could be in an election before any of this is implemented. Generational plans require political continuity. Right now, that continuity is uncertain, so the risks aren't theoretical. They're immediate, they're quantifiable, and they're significant. But here's what this is really about. Beyond the numbers, beyond the policy details, beyond the political theater, Canada is making 4 simultaneous bets that will define their next decade. Bet number 1, markets will hold. Canada is assuming that despite enormous deficits, investor confidence remains stable, that bond yields don't spike, that credit ratings stay strong, that capital continues viewing Canada as safe harbor, even while they're spending aggressively. One bad inflation print changes that calculation overnight. Bet number 2, time is on their side. This budget is designed to pay off in 5 to 10 years, not next quarter. They're betting that investments in housing and energy and infrastructure deliver tangible returns before fiscal pressure becomes unsustainable. But the runway isn't infinite. If global conditions deteriorate, if rates stay high, if demand softens, that clock accelerates and suddenly long-term strategy looks like short-term miscalculation. Bet number 3, political patience exists. This is a minority government asking voters to accept short-term discomfort for long-term gain, to delay gratification, to trust that sacrifice today creates prosperity tomorrow. In an era of instant gratification and the social media outrage, that's an extraordinary ask. Bet number 4, seriousness still matters. The boldest gamble of all. Canada is betting they can do what much of the West has failed to do. Embrace long-term thinking, invest without collapsing into dysfunction, reform without triggering populist backlash. They're betting that in a world retreating into short-termism, there's still room for nations that believe in the long game. That's not just fiscal policy, that's philosophy. So let's bring this home. What does Canada's budget actually tell us? It tells us that mid-sized powers are rethinking their relationships with traditional allies, that dependency is being recognized as vulnerability, that the window for strategic repositioning is closing, and some countries are moving while they still can. It tells us that fiscal conservatism isn't the only responsible option, that there are moments when calculated risk beats cautious stagnation. That leadership sometimes means doing the unpopular thing because you believe it's the necessary thing, and it tells us something else. Over the next 20 years, the countries that come out ahead probably won't be the ones with the most aircraft carriers or the biggest populations. They'll be the ones that saw the shift coming early enough to act, had a clear idea of what they were building toward, and managed to execute on that vision even when it got difficult. Canada just demonstrated they might be one of those countries. Will it work? Will the investments deliver? Will the gamble pay off? Nobody knows yet. This is a multi-year experiment in national reinvention. The results won't be clear until 2030 at the earliest. But here's what we do know. Canada looked at an unstable world and decided that playing it safe was actually the riskiest move. They chose transformation over incremental adjustment, and they chose sovereignty over dependency. They chose the long game. And in a world where most governments are too scared to choose anything at all, that matters. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Canada made the right call? Is this genuine vision or expensive miscalculation? Let me know in the comments below. And if you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person who thinks deeply about these moments. You don't want sound bites, you want understanding. That's rare and it's valuable. If you found this analysis helpful, hit that subscribe button. We cover geopolitics, economics, and power dynamics that sit quietly underneath the headlines. No shouting, no clickbait, just depth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.